Um, I'm excited to see some familiar names. There are some names that have come up on the attendee list that I probably do not know, and I'm very excited to have you here this evening. So welcome to Zooming with the Mayor. Catchy title. I'm Mayor Ruth Springer, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. My guest is going to be David Wolf. He is the Chief of Police of the Olivet Police Department. Similar to Coffee with the Mayor, but for those who have attended those, Chief Wolf is going to give a short presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. But before we begin, I'd like to kind of set the stage for us so that we have a meaningful dialogue with each other. Since May 25th, our country has been embroiled in protests, both peaceful and violent, as an expression of anger over the murder of George Floyd. The murder of George Floyd was a desecration of everything that we as people should hold sacred: fairness, compassion, humanity, equality, and life. The man who murdered George Floyd wore the police uniform, and he violated every tenet which he swore an oath to uphold. Eric Chauvin was a racist long before he put on the uniform. He had evil in his mind and in his heart. He disrespected the uniform and has forever tarnished good, compassionate, fair-minded police officers. There are many conversations to be had, both on a national and on a local level, with many different people, different departments, different ideas and opinions coming together at the table. The conversation we are having tonight is really important, and it is about the Olivet Police Department, about its policies and its procedures. And I know that it's easy for all of us to be able to bleed into politics, but I'm going to try to keep us focused on talking about Olivet, because this is where we live. And if this is the changes that we want to make within our community, so that we can have a place that we call home, that we love calling home, and that meets all of our needs. So we're going to stay focused on Olivet. I hope when you leave here tonight, you'll have a better understanding of the policies and procedures Olivet Police Department already has in place. Many of these policies and procedures have been in place for quite some time, actually, and a good number of them have been a part of the national conversation. So you will be surprised to see what we already have in place and how long it has been in place. And while we are proud that we proactively have had these policies in place, there is always room for conversation and improvement, and we know that. The Olivet Police Department is committed to their mission to protect and serve every person with fairness and compassion, while embracing Olivet's diversity and honoring the constitutional rights of all individuals. With that, I welcome again all of you, and I'm going to turn it over to Chief Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor Springer. As the mayor said, we do very much appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight, even if it is virtually. I know that we are in different times for sure, but we all have busy schedules, and it's encouraging to know that you are interested in the department and in the city and in our government and how we do things. So again, thank you. I welcome you. I'm glad that you're here. As the mayor said, there is always room for dialogue. There's always room for discussion. There's always room for improvement. And I think these types of events are definitely the catalyst for that. So I'd like to start off by saying that the Olivet Police Department is a CALEA accredited police department. And CALEA, the letters C-A-L-E-A, stand for the Commission on the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies. And what CALEA is it is an independent third party that assesses police departments based on a specific set of standards. And those standards range the gamut from use of force to prisoner transportation, to the budget, to reporting, to all kinds of things. And I think it's important to know that CALEA was started back in 1978, and it was the main organizations that drive CALEA. There's 4 main professional law enforcement organizations that drive CALEA. There's the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. There is NOBLE, which is NOBLE. It's the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. There is the NSA, which actually is the National Sheriff's Association. And then there's an organization called PERF, P-E-R-F, which is the Police Executive Research Forum. And these 4 organizations are made up of very educated, very informed individuals who drive the standards and the best practices that CALEA goes out and assesses agencies on. There's roughly 18,000 police departments in the United States. About somewhere between 5 and 6% of those are CALEA accredited. So that's less than 1,000. And Olivet Police Department is one of those. And I think that while certainly our culture and our vision and our mission is not driven by CALEA. We do the things that we do because they're the right things to do. But we are held accountable by having to show that we do what we say we do. We have to show proofs of what's in our policies, and we do what we say we do, and we are held accountable by this third-party organization. And I think that is very worthwhile to note. I want to show you, I know the mayor read our vision statement, and I want to show you this. So let me find it. So this is our vision and our mission statement. And these were 2 things that I revised when I became chief last year. And this billboard is on the wall in the police department as soon as officers enter every day. And these are both out on our website, on the web pages, the police department web pages of the city's website. I highly encourage you to check out that website and read what the mission and vision statement have to say. But this is posted on the wall as officers walk into the department every single day. And we talk about things like operational transparency and having empathy for people in crisis, having integrity, and owning our successes and our shortcomings, and always having the ability to self-evaluate ourselves all the time so that we are constantly getting better. The other thing that officers see when they walk into the building every day is our law enforcement code of ethics, which again talks about how noble of a profession law enforcement is, and reminding us why we got into this profession, to help people and to treat people fairly and to make sure that we are serving our community every day the best that we can do. And I think it's important that those are actual physical reminders that officers see every day when they walk into the police department. What I'd like to do is very quickly go over some things that the city council, city manager Barb Sondag, myself, we've received some emails inquiring about the police department and how we do things and things like that. So really what I want to do is quickly go through some things before we open it up to questions. But there is a campaign out there right now called 8 Can't Wait. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not, but it is a campaign that is going on nationwide. And what it is there are 8 tenets to this 8 Can't Wait campaign. And people are suggesting that all police departments across the country should have policies that address these 8 tenets. And I'll tell you the tenets. The first one is to ban chokeholds. The second one is to require de-escalation. The third one is to require warnings before shooting our firearms. Fourth one is to require exhausting alternatives before actually shooting somebody. The fifth one is officers require a duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require a use of force continuum, and require comprehensive reporting. So those are the 8 things that people are requesting that departments have across the country. And what I'm proud to say is that the Olivet Police Department has had policies that address each one of those tenets, either with a prohibition on the action or with a very specific exception as to when that action might be reasonable. And we've addressed those 8 tenets for years. And those are things that we've had in place before this campaign started. And it makes me proud to know that we can say that we recognize those as very valuable concerns of the public that we serve, and we do address those. We've been asked about body cameras, and are we get body cameras? What's our feeling on body cameras? And I will tell you that I see the value in body cameras. We don't have them yet. However, they are in our capital plan to purchase within the next couple of years. All of our officers have carried digital voice recorders for over a decade, so that every interaction that they have with somebody of the public is audio recorded, so that we can go back and review an officer's actions. Should we have a complaint? Should we have a compliment? Any phone call that I may receive about an officer's actions, good or bad, we're able to go back and look at it. We also have in-car cameras that record traffic stops and record incidents that happen outside. So we are looking at body cameras. I think that the technology is almost there. And one of the things that concerns me is making sure that we get the best camera for Olivet, and that we are able to make sure that we're using that technology to the best of its ability and that it fits in with our operations the best it can. There have also been laws about, and people have concerns about, well, what is an open record when it comes to body cameras? If an officer responds to a medical call and somebody's in medical crisis or having a medical issue, and our officers are inside the house with the body camera, people don't necessarily want that video to be able to be released. And so one of the things that the legislature passed a few years ago, they passed some laws that dealt with that. And then recently, within the last few years, they revised that law again. And so one of the things that I want to make sure is that we have that the legislature has a good stance on making sure that people's privacy is protected, and what is an open record and what is not, and what can be released and what cannot. So that's how I see body cameras. I do see us getting them in the next couple of years, but I think we want to make sure some things are ironed out first. One of the things that they'll ask us is, how do you know you're getting a good officer? How do you vet your officers? We have a very extensive hiring process. And what I'd like to do is just very quickly go through the hiring process for you. So first of all, obviously we advertise when we have an opening, and we advertise in a variety of places. We advertise in minority-owned publications. We advertise on websites like Indeed. We go to colleges and give presentations. We go to police academies to give presentations. And so we try to do our very best to put the word out to a very diverse group of people that we're looking for employees. So the first step is somebody has to fill out an application, of course, and that application is extremely long and tedious, but it obviously serves a purpose, because there's a lot of things that we want to know about somebody before we even advance into the process. So the process starts with a very long application. If their application passes muster, then there's a written exam. And the written exam is not solely just a pen and paper exam. There's a video component to it where applicants watch a aerial, and it doesn't matter whether they've had law enforcement experience or not. The idea of the video The way that the video clips have been designed is they've been designed to draw out certain characteristics from a person's personality. And so they watch a scenario and then they answer questions about the scenario. If they pass the written exam, then they move on to an interview board. And the interview board is not made up of people within Olivet. It is made up of command staff officers, or at least officers of the rank of sergeant of regional police departments. And typically there's 3 people on that board. Typically they have 10 questions that they ask the applicant, and then they score the applicant, obviously based on their own experiences and their own knowledge of officers, and they also know the type of officer that we're looking for. And so then they score those applicants, and then they turn those scores over to us. The people that pass, then they have an interview with me. And so then I have a chance to ask maybe some of the same questions or questions of my own that again are meant to elicit certain types of responses that are important to me in terms of my officers for the Olivet community. And that is a big portion of the, obviously the point of the application process for me is to find the best officer for Olivet. And it's really not to be, that's not really to be used as a punchline that I'm just looking for the best person. I'm looking for the best person that fits Olivet, that understands my vision, that understands the mission, that understands for the person the best. Yes, can you still hear me? Okay, it's my screen said something. Okay. If they pass my interview, then the next step is there's a background investigation. And again, the background investigation is very thorough. We contact references that they've listed. We've contact previous employers. If that includes previous police departments, then we check with those police departments to see what type of officer that person was, what type of complaints that they may have gotten, what type of awards or compliments or commendations. So those are all things that we definitely look into in the background investigation. We also look at educational institutions. If they have a higher education, we verify that. One of the steps in the process in the background investigation is also what's called a CVSA, or a computer voice stress analyzer. It's much like a polygraph or lie detector test. And so the applicants are given a very extensive packet that has dozens and dozens of questions in it. They take that home, they answer it, they bring that back, they turn it into one of my CVSA examiners who has a chance to review it, and then they're scheduled for a CVSA exam. If they pass that, if they pass the entire background investigation, then they have a medical, an actual physical exam and a drug screen. If they pass that, they have to take a physical abilities assessment, which is not the standard run a mile and a half, how many push-ups, how many sit-ups, but it's more of an obstacle course type assessment to make sure that they can perform the functions of the job. If they pass that, the very last step in the process before Barb gives the final, yes, we want this person and she's good with my decision, is they go through a psychological assessment. And we have a psychiatrist that we have on retainer per se, and they're brought in. That doctor gives them a variety of different personality tests and interviews that person. And then we get a report from a psychologist as to whether the doctor thinks that that person is fit to be an officer. So again, it is a very, very lengthy process meant to get us the best people for Olivet that we can. So I think that's something else that people are very interested to know. With that, I would like to open up to questions and create a dialogue.
Thank you, Chief. So for those who are unfamiliar with how Zoom works, you want to ask a question. If you put your cursor over the screen at any place, there'll be a little thing comes up, and it's called chat. So if you click, I'm sorry, Q&A, and you can type, so where it is, type in your questions. and ask your questions, or if you would prefer, you may raise your hand, and I will unmute you and you can verbally ask your question. So don't be shy. Whatever is on your mind, please ask, because we would prefer to know what people are thinking and for them to walk around thinking it and not to know the answers to their questions. So that's why we're here tonight, to answer the tough questions. So Chief, let me ask this while people are thinking about their questions. And I know we're trying to stay focused on all of it, but we are a region. So let's talk about other police departments that you might know about inside the region. Would you say that the hiring practices of Olivet are pretty standard within our region from the police departments that you know?
I would. I think that, again, the departments that I know, and I know a lot. One of the boards that I serve on is the LEO group, or the Law Enforcement Officials of Greater St. Louis. This year, I'm the president of that board. We meet a month, although COVID has kind of put a little bit of a damper on that. But my point is that the St. Louis region has a very, very strong law enforcement community, and we all collaborate, we share ideas, we talk, and the hiring process that goes on within the majority of the agencies within this region are very similar to the one I described.
All righty. So we do have a question for you, Chief. The question is, how long has Olivet been studying cameras, and how is data stored?
So we've been looking at, and I assume you're talking about body cameras. We've been looking at body cameras for probably, I would say, the last 5 years. And while we were still in our old building, we did some trial and evaluation of several different cameras. Excuse me. And one of the things that we found was really the technology that exists between the different manufacturers is really typically all about the same. There might be a couple more bells and whistles on one camera versus another, but right now, really the technology is pretty much the same when you move from camera to camera. So we've been looking at them for about 5 years. And I think the thought was knowing that we would eventually get them, but again, making sure that we are getting the best piece of equipment for our operations for this community. The data is stored either locally on a server, on a computer server at the station. For instance, our in-car cameras right now have the functionality so that when officers are out and about and their car camera gets turned on, it gets recorded onto a DVR, or a digital video recorder, in the car. And then when they drive onto the parking lot, it actually wirelessly transfers to a computer server within the police department. So currently it's stored locally. There are options to store the data in the cloud. And again, but then again, you're talking different pricing, different functionality. But obviously the two main ways are either in the cloud or locally in the department, which is what we do now for our in-car cameras.
So just to be clear, our police officers now have cameras in their cars. So if they pull up behind a car that they have stopped, all of that is being recorded on the car camera. Okay. Anybody else?
Just to interject, I believe, Chief, you folks use audio recording though?
We do. As I mentioned, we do have, all of our officers carry digital voice recorders. They all carry them either in their pocket or on their belt. And we've carried those for over a decade. And they are required by policy to record every interaction that they have with the public. And like I said, it's a very valuable tool, so that when I get comments from the public, either good or bad, or in terms of officers being able to go back and review what happened during an incident for their police report or for the investigation, all that information is there, and it is extremely helpful to have that.
Another question for us. Have you seen an uptick in a particular crime that you are concerned about?
I think that we have been, what I would say is not under normal circumstances. When COVID first came to be, or first became a problem, we saw an uptick in small types of vandalism. And what we were finding was it was really, the people that were responsible for that were kids who were stir crazy, and they were bored, and they were out doing silly stuff, and they were just being knuckleheads, and it was nothing too serious. We have been, knock on wood, fortunate. A lot of areas, even within St. Louis County, have seen a large uptick in things like domestic violence because everybody's at home, and sometimes the nerves get short and people don't have places to go. We have been fortunate. We have not seen that. And I would say that for really the most part, the crime we do have, first of all, the vast majority of our crime is property crime. And I would say that while we may have a slight increase here and there, our crime rate is pretty steady. Obviously, this is a safe community to live in. We aren't immune to crime, like no area is immune to crime. But I would not say that we've seen recently a specific uptick.
Chief, can you talk to the idea about community policing? What is it that our police department does? What do our officers do to interact with the public, to really get a sense that they know who our residents are and that sort of thing?
So community policing is something that is a philosophy of policing that I strongly support. I think that it's extremely important that our officers know and our community know that it is not an us versus them. It's not the mentality that we have. We are only going to accomplish our objectives with events like this, with dialogue with our residents. What are their concerns? What are their fears? What do they want? And so we accomplish those things every day. And it may not be at a turkey trot event, and it may not be at the drive-in movie tomorrow night, but it's the daily activities of our officers driving to a business, getting out of the car, walking in, saying hi to the business owner. Obviously during the last few months, it's been a little bit different and a little bit more difficult, but it's that type of behavior that fosters that relationship. It's officers driving around the neighborhoods, and when they see kids playing outside, they get out and they give a fist bump to the kid, or they throw the football around, or they stop at the lemonade stand and get a cup of lemonade. And I don't think that it has to be, while those big events are an excellent opportunity for a mass amount of people to see our officers doing good and interacting and those types of things. For me, I think it can be the more daily personal interaction that maybe one officer has with one person that, like I said, fosters that community relationship. I think another thing that our officers do a very good job at is, even on something like a traffic stop, where tensions might be a little bit more, might be high, emotions might be high. Certainly people don't like getting stopped by the police for a traffic ticket or whatever the case may be. But I think our officers do a really good job of interacting with the occupants of the car and letting them know that, hey, it's not a big deal. I am out here doing my job. This is how you take care of it. They act professional. They're not rude. And I think that even times, and I'm going to use the word crisis, even times like that, our officers can have a positive impact on that community relationship.
Um, I am going to stop 1 second and make a shameless plug for the drive-in movie tomorrow night. I don't know how many people who are listening right now even know that we're having a drive-in movie tomorrow night at Stacy Park. It starts at 8:30. We are showing the movie Onward. Onward was in theater right around the time that COVID hit, so it is an extremely current movie, and it is just $5 for a carload of people. Excuse me. And so if you have nothing better to do, or you would like to go to a drive-in movie and remind yourself of what it was like to be a kid, I'm assuming I'm speaking to a small percentage of the audience, myself included, then call up the Park and Rec department and get yourself a ticket. So that's my shameless plug. We do have another question. Olivet seems to have low turnover of police. Approximately how much does it cost to hire a new officer?
It's a good question. And I mean, without having the numbers right in front of me, you know, typically, obviously, when we have a position to fill, there's an advertising cost that is a few $100. We have to order the tests, which typically are about $30 a test. So depending upon how many applicants we have, it's that number times the cost of the test. There's and then of course through the process, the medical exam costs the city a little bit of money. The physical abilities assessment costs a little bit of money, and the psychological test costs several $100s. So just the initial process, you're probably talking about, I don't know, maybe $2,000-3,000 just for the initial process. Once that officer is on board, then of course we do supply them with first couple sets of uniforms, their duty belt, some equipment. So you know, I would say that it's probably in the neighborhood of $5,000 to completely go through the process of onboarding a new officer, depending upon, again, how many applicants we have. And then, of course, there's the time of the officers doing the background investigation and the CBSA exam, and you know, so you know, those man hours. And just to further this a little bit, once we do make an offer and the applicant accepts the job, they're not just thrown out on the street. They have a field training instructor, an FTI, who they ride with for 12 weeks. And that FTI makes sure that they are inundated with everything that we do in our job. They make sure that they, you know, from very basic things like just, do you know the streets? Do you know where you are in Olivet? To what does our use of force policy say? What does this policy say? How do you handle this type of call? How do you book a prisoner? All of those things are covered during that 12 weeks. After that 12 weeks, if the officer successfully completes that training program, then they start riding by themselves. But for the first 9 months, so for the completion of that first year, they are shadowed by a field training instructor. So we make sure that they are put on a shift where there is a field training instructor who responds to every call that officer is assigned to. And the FTI stands in the background unless he or she doesn't need to, or needs to get involved. But that FTI shadows that officer to make the officers is handling calls the Olivet way. And at the completion of that 9 months, if everything goes as planned, then that officer comes off probation, and then they are a full police officer.
I'm going to take this question and then I'll go back. When all the new buildings are finished, do you think you will need to hire more officers? I'm assuming that we're talking about the commercial buildings, because the only other building that the city's actually building is going to be the community center, the new developments, right?
So that is something that I have thought about, and it's something that City Manager Barb Sondag and I have talked. We've broached the subject. We won't know really until the development is in full swing and we see how much is it affecting our workload and things like that, I think it's a possibility. But to give a definite answer, yes, we need X number of new officers. I don't know. I think that it's a likelihood, but just because of the increased activity and so on and so forth, the more traffic, more people, all the things. So it is a possibility.
I would add on that it's an unlikely possibility. The reality is it may do some reshifting of some assignments, but the reality is if you have the type of developments that are going on, some of the smaller retail or the office space doesn't typically have a lot of impact on policing, as opposed to a big box store tends to have more calls than that. It is something that we have talked about, and it is something that we would look at. But I would say the same thing for police as I've said, the fire, which is our fire department, which is I don't anticipate this being the development being a game changer on our calls for service or on how we have to respond to those calls of service. So we'll fight that out later.
Are there any other questions? I had something in my head and I was listening to intently and it just, did anybody have anything else they'd like to ask the chief?
Anything you're dying to know?
Yeah, policies, procedures, anything. That's why he's here.
Hot seat.
He's in the hot seat. Is there anything else that you need for us to know, Chief?
I closed Coffee with a Cop with this, and I think it's important that for those who weren't there to know, for you to know where your chief stands on, and we'll go back to the Minneapolis incident because that was a catalyst for what's going on. And my feeling about that is that was an incredible miscarriage of justice. And I don't know if you've watched the video, but I did. And as I watched it, I was literally speechless. And I did not believe what I was seeing, because that is not how we are trained. That is not certainly the culture of the Olivet Police Department, let alone the culture of what I believe the region. And believe me, nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop, because we do swear an oath. And I get a little giddy every time I put my uniform on, because I believe in what we do. And when you have an officer who decides to do what that officer did, they tarnish and stain the badge that we wear, that's a symbol of your trust in us. And it's a very, very fragile thing to begin with. And then something like that happens and people think, where do we go? So I think it's very important for you to know how I feel about it, and that I have not spoken to one officer in this department nor anywhere else who was horrified by what happened. And I think sometimes people say, oh, he was just a bad apple. Well, and I agree, there's bad apples in every profession. You can have a bad bartender, you can have a bad teacher, you can have a bad waiter, whatever. But to have a bad apple in law enforcement means something entirely different, because of the authority and the power and the tools at our disposal. We can't have bad apples. And it is our responsibility to do what we can to vet those applicants. And God forbid one slips by, to do what we need to do to rectify that, call it a mistake if one of those people is hired. But to say that he was just a bad apple and kind of slough it off to that in law enforcement is we have a responsibility that's higher than that. Barb, do you want to tell your anecdote about a bad apple?
Yeah, it's the idea of having a bad apple is if you were to go to an orchard, an apple orchard, and you said to the keeper, how are the apples? And they say, well, there's one bad one in the orchard, and they're like, oh, well, what would happen if I got that one? And it's like, well, it'll kill you. Chances are you'd probably go to another orchard. And that's kind of the severity and the seriousness with which we look at our police officers and the jobs that they do and the responsibility that they have.
I think it's important to note that your officers are only human. Even the best officers are only human, and humans make mistakes. And that is a part of life that we, unless we are robotic, that is a part of life that we cannot change. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to do whatever it is that we can to mitigate those mistakes and to deal with those mistakes once they happen. I actually had a little bit of an epiphany tonight. I was driving up Olive Street Road, and you know, it's been a hard time in law enforcement right now. You know, it's easy. It's pretty easy to do this job when the sea is calm. You know, anybody can man the helm when the sea is calm, but right now the seas are anything but calm. And in fact, you know, in some places they're angry. And I've always said that while I guide the ship, I've used this analogy several times about this department. While I guide the ship, it gets to its destination because of the people that work for me. They are the ones that are out there every day doing the job, fulfilling the mission, living the vision, and it gets to where it's going because of that. And the seas are rough, and it's going to be difficult to navigate right now, but we will. We will do our job, and they will calm down again. But your officers do a very good job. Very proud of the officers. And so my epiphany was, you know, looking at the sea and how angry it is, we can look at this as a, you know, it's been exhausting, it's been tiring and all these things, but I tend to be an optimist, and looking at this as a glass is half full time in our life, we can look at this as this is a chance to be a part of something huge. This is a chance to be a part of real change in our country. And I think if every one of us looks at it that way and says we could be a part of something, because this involves more than just the police. What's going on right now is not just a police problem. And if we can look at it as like, man, I could be a part of something really big, I think that that's a much better way to look at what's going on right now.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I do have two questions, but before I take those questions, what I had wanted you to share with us tonight was where do our officers come, and maybe you covered some of that initially through the hiring process, but where do we get applicants from, generally speaking? Obviously, everybody's competing for applicants. How easy is it for us to get applicants? And what other processes have we employed in order to get those applicants?
So, Madam Mayor, you are right. Recruitment nationwide is down 63% for law enforcement, which makes recruiting very difficult. However, we still persevere. Like we do, we advertise in minority-owned publications. We advertise on websites. We go to the police academies. There's 16 different police academies in the state. Now, we don't travel to all of them, but we'll go to regional ones, St. Louis City. Well, not so much St. Louis City, they hire for their department, but the county academy, what's called Eastern Missouri Academy, which is over in St. Charles County, Jefferson County. The ones that are more regional, we will do presentations at. I ask my officers to all sort of be recruiters, to always be listening for people who have an interest in it, and to bring them in, give them a tour, let them meet some people. I have some ideas that I want to talk to Barb about for this coming fiscal year. Again, that's one of our goals. One of our goals going forward is to develop a more robust recruitment plan so that we can reach more people. Because it is very important to me that we have a diverse force, and it's important to be putting ourselves in places where we're going to get the results that we want, which is a diverse department. And I think it's important to point out that diversity is not just black and white. Diversity is gender, and it's religion, and it's sexuality, and it's ethnicity, and all of those things are tied into diversity. And so part of our recruitment plan, it will be incumbent upon us to make sure that we're having events and doing things to make sure that we're getting in front of as diverse of a population as we can.
Well, that dovetails very nicely into the question that's been asked. What is the racial makeup and gender makeup on the force?
So the Alva Police Department has 23 officers, including me. We have 2 black males. One is a lieutenant, one is a sergeant. We have 3 females. One is my deputy chief. And then during this last hiring process, we were fortunate enough to get another white female and then a black female. So out of 23 officers, 3 of them are African American and 3 of them are women.
Okay. Next question is, what's a citizen's responsibility during interaction with the police? I'm assuming we're talking traffic stop or some other, I guess, potential interaction. How should we react?
I think that I guess the best answer to that is to, the canned answer, I guess, would be to say is to comply with what the officer is asking you to do. I think that there are a lot of unfortunate incidents that happen around the country because tensions get high, emotions run high, people are yelling and screaming. I think the best thing to do is to remain calm, to comply with what the officer is asking. Now, certainly, grain of salt, if you know the officer is asking you to do something that he doesn't have the right to ask you to do, I'm not asking you to comply with an unlawful or unconstitutional request. But certainly I think the calmer the situation remains, and we've all seen this in our own personal lives, whether it's at home or at work, the calmer the situation is, the outcome.
I hope that answered your question. Are there other questions? I found for myself personally that when I've been stopped speeding up on a road, I mean, never, that I understand that I do not like to get, I don't like getting pulled over. I don't like getting stopped. That if I behave in a manner that if I'm not going to threaten, or I won't probably be threatened, I think it's very hard, and I'm speaking obviously as a white woman, so it's a different conversation to have if I was Black than white. But even I have changed how I deal with when I'm being stopped. I will put my hands on the steering wheel. I will not make any quick motions towards my purse, towards anything, because, you know, I don't know who that other person is, and I don't want to create a situation where I've now put myself in a situation where I could be at risk. So you know, hands on the steering wheel, and that's it.
And I don't mean to make light of the situation. I hope my response wasn't too horrific, but because I get it. You know, I know that being stopped causes anxiety, and it causes tensions to elevate, and it causes emotions to elevate. And I understand that. I'm not trying to discount the feelings of the person that's having the interaction with the officer. But my point is that if everybody remains calm, and that doesn't mean that you can't have a discussion with the officer or ask, you know, why am I getting that? Or, you know, whatever the question might be. But my point is, you know, the officer, because he or she doesn't know who's in the car necessarily, what they're walking into, who they're dealing with. You know, I mean, you know what type of person you are, so you know there's no reason to worry. The officer doesn't necessarily know that. And so we are trained to be on alert and to have, you know, to have heightened sense of surroundings and what's going on. But if everybody remains calm, then it just allows, I think, for the situation to flow much more.
Are there any other questions for the chief? No? No.
I would like to say one last thing. If you do have a question and you don't necessarily want to ask it here, you know, certainly feel free to email, call, and we can chat.
I am really looking forward to the time when we can all come back together again. I've missed seeing you. It was always probably the most enjoyable part of being the mayor, was to be able to have those monthly interactions with you. For those who know that I enjoy baking, I have not been baking because that would not have been a good result for me, being kept at home with all that baked goods. So I need to be back with all of you again so that I can hone those skills up again. So I am very much looking forward to that. And it's going to be an interesting year. I like having your input, so please continue to give it. We need it. None of us has a corner on the market of how things should go or how things should run. So, you know, we're always here to listen. So keep watching. I have not yet set a date for July, nor do I have a guest yet, but I certainly will have a coffee with the mayor probably in the morning. If you'd like the chief to come back again at any point in time, simply email me and say, bring it back, and I will be happy to do that. There are two questions so before we go. So, oh, no. Did I get it? And no, I think that's it. And I will see all of you again next month. Thank you so much for attending, and you all have a good evening. Stay safe and stay well.